Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I come from a long line of farmers, deeply rooted in the traditions of hard work and respect for the land. Our family had settled in a quaint countryside, where my grandparents had purchased a beautiful farmhouse on a vast plot of land after migrating from Europe to the USA. The farmhouse became the heart of our family, a symbol of our heritage and resilience. Tragedy struck a couple of years ago when both my grandparents passed away within months of each other. As the rightful heirs, my parents inherited the entire property, including the land where the farmhouse stood. Realizing that managing such a large expanse of land would be challenging, they made the difficult decision to sell the farmhouse while retaining the rest of the property. With the proceeds, they built a new house for themselves and another for my aunt and her husband, Jack and Diane. It seemed like an ideal arrangement. Each family had their own home, and the farmhouse found a new owner who promised to preserve its charm. Little did we know that the new owner, whom we'll call Daniel, was an entitled and arrogant man. Although he appeared pleasant when he bought the farmhouse, it didn't take long for his true colors to emerge. His major renovations began, and with them came a parade of contractors and their trucks. Initially, they parked on Jack and Diane's property without permission, despite being offered an alternative spot. Jack, being a respectful and patient man, kindly asked the workers to avoid parking on the grass as it would damage their property. However, the workers continued to disregard their request, causing frustration to brew within Jack and Diane. Unbeknownst to the arrogant Daniel, Jack decided to take matters into his own hands. He constructed a fence to protect their land, disrupting the convenience of the construction workers, but rightly asserting their rights. Daniel's entitlement reached new heights when he demanded that Jack and Diane remove the fence. In response, Jack stood his ground, refusing to bow down to Daniel's unreasonable demands. The following day, Jack woke up to find sections of his fence mysteriously missing, confirming his suspicions that Daniel was responsible. Angered by this act of vandalism, Jack devised a plan to teach Daniel a lesson. Jack initiated a massive irrigation project, flooding the area around the fence. With the help of the water company, he ensured that the construction site turned into a muddy mess. Trucks got stuck, and chaos ensued, further delaying Daniel's renovations. It was a small taste of justice, but Jack and Diane weren't finished. Months passed, and Daniel's house neared completion, except for the empty swimming pool that awaited filling. In a moment of sheer audacity, Daniel decided to tap into the well on Jack and Diane's property to fill his pool. Unbeknownst to him, the well had limited capacity and lacked the capability to handle such demands. The well ran dry, and sand and dirt infiltrated the water supply, causing irreparable damage. When confronted with the consequences of his actions, Daniel responded with entitlement, placing the blame on Jack and Diane for the well's location. Enraged by his lack of remorse, Jack extended an olive branch, offering to split the cost of repairing the well. However, Daniel's obstinacy and refusal to take responsibility would seal his fate. A year or two later, facing mounting frustrations and the inability to sell a house without water access or proper waste removal, Daniel decided to sell. Jack saw an opportunity, a chance to turn the tables and restore justice. He cunningly severed the water supply leading to Daniel's house and capped the septic line, leaving the property devoid of vital services. Daniel, now facing the consequences of his actions, took Jack and Diane to court, hoping to shift blame and force them to restore the services. However, the court promptly dismissed his case, recognizing that the well and septic line were not entitled to any house other than Jack and Diane's, as per the property's division and my grandparents' will. The house remained vacant for months, a testament to Daniel's greed and arrogance. Numerous offers to negotiate the restoration of services were met with resolute rejection from Jack and Diane. It wasn't until a small farming corporation saw an opportunity that the saga reached its climax. They approached Daniel with a quarter of the asking price, and facing mounting pressure and financial strain, he begrudgingly accepted. But there was a twist. In a final act of defiance, Jack and Diane negotiated an agreement with the corporation, allowing them to use the well water and septic line on their terms. This unexpected turn infuriated Daniel, amplifying his losses and intensifying his frustration. Should the corporation decide to sell the property, their pockets would be lined with riches, and Daniel would be left with regret and bitterness. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Back in 2011, my immediate family and I traveled to Saudi Arabia for Umrah. or what's known as the Lesser Pilgrimage. We visited Makkah, made rounds around the Kaaba, and prayed with all our heart and soul. My dad and I were excited about going on a spiritual journey and leaving behind the problems of the world. However, it turned out that some problems just wouldn't leave us. As soon as we landed at Jeddah's airport, our plan was to take a taxi to Makkah and complete the Umrah while we were still enthusiastic. However, we were diverted to our relative's house in Jeddah, where we discovered that 4 or 5 of my mother's relatives and their families had gathered up and spontaneously crashed at my grandfather's house for a giant family reunion. Naturally, my dad, my maternal grandfather, and I were really upset over this development because my mom's side of the family, for the lack of a more polite word, was shady. Most of them I was on good terms with, but once I realized that my least favorite uncle and aunt had come along, my enthusiasm deflated like a balloon. For a quick comparison, Uncle Zubair and Aunt Rubina were the Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia of the family to me. They spoiled their own kids rotten, were stingy with me before getting noticed, and they loved to take advantage of the fact that I couldn't speak Urdu at all when I was younger. They talked behind my back and made fun of me for various things. When my mother brought it up, they simply dismissed it as a misunderstanding on my part, claiming that I didn't understand Urdu. My mother trusted them, but I could understand a lot of what they were saying, and going through all of that made me intensely dislike them. Back in 2011, the entire group of relatives came up with a great plan. Let's complete our Umrah trip as a group of 23 people. It'll be a great time. My father and I reluctantly agreed, and before heading to Makkah, my father made a contingency plan for the rare occasion when my siblings or I would get lost. My mother shared it with the group, and everyone thought it was a good idea. If someone got lost, we would all meet on the X floor of the clock tower building and wait for the rest to arrive. No problems, right? We went to Makkah, had dinner in the clock tower hotel, and as I was getting napkins to clean up after the food, the men split up and abruptly left for the Kaaba. The ladies had already left, and Aunt Rubina was still at the table, waiting for the napkins. When I asked her where all the men went, she smiled and pointed in the wrong direction. She also told me twice that our contingency plan had changed, and we were supposed to meet on the Y floor if we got lost instead of the original plan. If I had been older, I would have noticed that something was very wrong with her words, but at 15 years old I was fearful of being left behind, so I ran off without doubting her. The result of her misleading me was 1 hour of searching the entire hotel for my father and the men, followed by 3 hours of circling the Kaaba, feeling distracted and disturbed because I couldn't find them anywhere. I eventually returned to the new contingency plan's location and cried myself to sleep on a rusty chair because none of the guards understood me, and I honestly thought I was lost for good. A couple of hours later, my father found me, and he got extremely mad at me for ditching the group and going to the wrong floor. However, he soon realized something was up when I told him what Aunt Rubina had told me. The men quickly arrived, hugged me, and when Uncle Zubair hugged me, he grinned and asked, "Did you feel the despair?" before laughing it off. The entire group of 23 people tried to talk to me and find the positives in the situation during the car ride back, but I had one thought on my mind the entire time. Did my uncle and aunt really try to intentionally mislead me and lose me in a foreign city? Later, I told my parents the whole story. My father was a little unsettled, and the rest of the trip continued with my parents keeping a close eye on me. Revenge. In 2015, we visited our homeland and met up with all these relatives who were excited to see my mom's American family. As expected, Uncle Zubair and Aunt Rubina were part of the gathering. I decided not to say anything about what happened 4 years prior, and made my mom promise not to mention the incident either since she loved reminiscing about things. About an hour into the trip, I realized that my uncle and aunt still thought I had the same language comprehension I had when I was 8 years old. It was amazing how they thought I was so stupid. However, in 2015, I was finally able to speak and understand Urdu fluently, but I wasn't going to reveal that to them. I decided to snoop around and maybe endure their mistreatment again with a recorder to show my mom that I was right all along about them lying to her. But here's where things get interesting. Uncle Zubair took me along with his son as we visited a couple of different apartments and houses for which he had the keys. He asked me to help him clean out these places, claiming that his neighbors were on vacation and had requested his assistance. His broken English and the way he frantically searched the entire place, indiscriminately throwing their belongings into giant trash bags and large rubber containers, made me doubt his story. These were the belongings of neighbors who apparently trusted him enough to leave their spare keys with him while they stayed with relatives in America or elsewhere for the summer. It was weird and shady. I had never seen anything like this back in the States. My suspicions grew when, on another day, Uncle Zubair's son called me from one of the mentioned apartments, asking me to pick him up. I discovered that the house was almost entirely empty, with my cousin having already filled it with his own stuff. He had the audacity to tell me, "Papa said this is my apartment now." What a riot! My uncle was robbing people of their apartments and houses while they were on vacation. A week later, after some unnoticed eavesdropping, I learned that Aunt Rubina and my other cousin were involved in the same dishonest activities in the neighboring state or province. They had better English skills and told me they were going to the other state to help my cousin study. I just nodded it off, fully aware of their true intentions. Yeah, go study your lying ass off, as if I didn't hear you talking about cleaning house preparations just 24 hours ago. Later that night, we were having dinner with Uncle Zubair and a few other family members. During a lull in the conversation, he asked me, "Son, what's your favorite part of the summer so far?" I smiled and replied in Urdu, "I love the real estate work you've been doing. Could you help me get a property as well?" His face drained the moment he realized that I knew about the shady things he had been doing. Everyone at the table started asking questions because my uncle was the last person they would have expected such behavior from. They urged me to provide more information, and I spilled the beans about what his son had said. "Papa said this is my apartment now," and the kind of deceitful activities he and his wife were involved in 5 towns over. The next thing I knew, I took my dinner plate back to my room as the drilling commenced in the dining room. As my family and the rest of the extended relatives found out, he had been emptying the apartments of neighbors who went overseas for the entire summer. He had cleared out around 10 flats and small houses, hauling their possessions to a storage unit somewhere unknown. The controversy grew. A couple of homeowners were alerted and chased Aunt Rubina and my cousin out of town. And soon after, my parents informed me that our entire family had basically disowned Uncle Zubair and Aunt Rubina's family for their immoral actions while being trusted with people's keys. In the end, I never had the chance to hit him with the "Did you feel despair" line he had used on me back in 2011. But man, am I glad I won't have to deal with their nonsense again. The next one is a petty revenge story. I work for an IT company that provides tech support. We receive calls for help and we try to assist. This guy called up asking for help to remove a piece of software that required administrator rights. It was pretty standard, nothing special. However, the computer he needed help with was his own personal computer. Obviously, we don't have any access or control over random people's computers. I have no way of helping him without the admin account, and he said he doesn't know the account. The software was some kind of parental management software that restricts his activities. This guy is in his early 20s. I know this because we can see the details of the people who call us on our system. So, it's kind of hilarious that he has this software installed. Anyway, after I tell him that I cannot help him, he ends up telling me that I work for a terrible company and that I should kill myself. I don't even respond and he hangs up the phone. Now, obviously the calls are recorded and I'm not going to just ignore what just happened. I tell my manager the story. He listens to the phone call. My manager then calls the liaison for the company he called from. They find out that this guy is an intern at the company. He no longer works for the company now. During the call, they decide to get the CEO on the phone and inform him about what happened. Shortly after that call, the CEO lets us know that he contacted the university that the guy is currently attending. The university has now dropped him from all his classes. This guy has lost his intern job and his placement at the university, all because he told me to kill myself on the phone. The next one is an entitled people story. So for some context, during the pandemic, I was living on the other side of the country. My father, who lived in the middle of it, was in his last months of stage 4 cancer, and I wanted to be closer to him. My ex-best friend, let's call him Will, suggested that I move in with him, as his housemate had left the country, and he lived much closer, so I moved in. The first few months were okay. I found a decent job and went to see my dad's family with him. However, my housemate, who was working full-time as well, was not paying for his share of the food and bills, but that's for later, so I was covering for him. My father passed away and I was devastated. I struggled to get up, leave the house, and really come to terms with losing my dad, who was always my hero and a strong-willed man. Will, frankly, was a twat about it. He'd say some pretty crappy things to try and play down my grief. While I wanted to take it easy at work, Unfortunately, it couldn't happen because Will was blowing all his money on weed debts, video game content, and whatever else, meaning I was buying all the food, tobacco, and paying the bills fully sometimes. The only thing I didn't cover was his part of the rent. On top of that, I was paying off some of his drug debts and then constantly having to get at him to pay me back. He also broke so many of my things when borrowing them and never paid me back for them. Also, about 6 months after my dad died, my grandmother passed away as well, and I was very close to her and had cared for her for a couple of years previously. He never really thanked me, never admitted how little he contributed, and would never show me bills for anything. He'd only face it when I'd got fed up with bailing him out and call him out, in which he'd turn on the waterworks, say he wants to die, be better for about 2 days, and then go back to old habits. On top of this, he was unemployed for like 6 months, and never tried to get benefits, and when he did get a job, he couldn't hold it down. But he did eventually get one at a call center, working from home. Eventually, I'd had enough. After over a year, I told him that if I don't see the bills, I won't pay, I won't buy any tobacco for him, won't give him any weed, etc. So he showed me the bills, and he had been overcharging me for our gas and electric. I lost it, not only because he'd basically charged me for the whole month's bills rather than my 50%, even on months when I'd pay both parts, he'd make me pay basically twice as much and pocket the rest, but also because half the time the money I gave him didn't even get paid to them. It then also turns out he hadn't paid for his half of the rent in over a year. I lost it and told him that if he ducks up one more time, that's it. I'll move out or he will. And to all appearances, for a couple of months, he did. I informed him that from now on, all rent will go through me in one payment to our landlord. As I was a month ahead with my rent and our contract was near the end, I said that in 2 months it'll be full rent to be paid. Well, surprise, surprise. Even after all the reminders, he didn't have his rent, and still wasn't paying his half of the bills. And again I argued with him about it. In the 2 months, he'd got himself a girlfriend, and when the 2 months came around, he didn't have his rent, but he'd gone out and done things with her, bought her gifts, etc. After the rent argument, the next morning at 5 a.m., he slinks his way out of the house, and his girlfriend woke me and my partner up to let them out. You need the keys to get out our gate, and he'd lost his. Bearing in mind, me and my partner both had work the next day. He ducked off in the morning. After that, I went to the landlord and said if he isn't gone, I am. And because he didn't pay his rent, the landlord chose me. Could not get hold of him. Eventually posted a status because it's obvious the only way to get him to be an adult is to affect his public image. Got a message from his brother saying it's not on and etc. He knows his brother is difficult and whatnot, so I took it down and was apologetic to Will, but I snapped out of that and gave him crap. So that day he calls our landlord to say he won't be returning, like I hadn't already spoken to him, and all he could say is rather than admitting he ducked up, that he used me, stole money off me meant for bills, that he lied about bills, etc. All he said was, OP changed since his dad died. Like, duck you, you absolute piece of crap. So he moved in with his girlfriend, and she kicked off with me and my partner, calling us all sorts. And it had become quite apparent he'd lied and made himself the victim. Never bothered me, I have receipts. Then all was quiet for about a year. A couple of weeks back, when Facebook Armageddon was on, I noticed his, now ex-girlfriend, had unblocked me. So, curious, I went on, and it sent an invite. She messaged asking if I'd meant it. I'd said hell no. She then info dumps on me what a crap person he is, how he's belittling, aggressive when drunk, how he'd not had a job for the last 8 months of their 1-year relationship, how she'd pay $300, $400 per month to pay off his drug debts. All the things we had warned her about when she had decided to go off at me and my partner. Like we didn't know what he was like. It basically ended with him getting drunk and beating her, which, while is very sad and no one should go through that, what did you expect letting a guy you've known barely 2 months live with you? Threatening to cut off her head, not letting her go to the hospital after he'd cut her deep, so she had to basically run away from him to get it treated. Some pretty horrific stuff, and I'd probably feel more bad for her if she herself wasn't a monumental idiot. Then, funnily enough, the next day, as he left while she was out, he goes back, takes all his things early in the morning, and leaves without telling her where. Don't know where he is now, couldn't give a duck. Only hope that he doesn't find someone else to live off and hurt. My partner and I still live at the flat. We are now engaged and very happy. It's been nice to be able to go and live life again, spend some money on myself and my partner, while he is obviously doomed to keep repeating himself. While this shouldn't give me a sense of satisfaction, it 100% does. The next one is an entitled parent story. I went to Six Flags over this past weekend to celebrate a friend's birthday, and all was well until we were in line for this one ride. The line wasn't too bad, and it was about a 40-minute wait. As we were waiting in line, I noticed these two parents with their toddler in a stroller just ahead of my group, and I thought to myself, how are they going to watch the kid and go on the ride? I naturally assumed that each parent would take a turn on the ride, and one would stay behind to watch their kid because that's the logical solution. Nope. When it was time for them to go for the ride, we watched these idiots roll their stroller with the poor kid in tow into the fast lane, and they both freaking turned around and headed towards their seats on the ride. The poor kid immediately started crying and sobbing for their mommy. Even the poor worker in the fast lane, who was definitely not getting paid enough to handle this bullcrap, just froze in shock. I hope he added babysitter to his resume, because that's what the idiots clearly thought that was on his name tag. When I tell you everybody in line was just in shock, like jaws were dropped and mean glares were thrown. To the woman who was working the microphone and managing the ride, you're everybody's hero. She immediately grabbed the mic and said, absolutely not. Your child needs a supervisor at all times. Finally, the parents read the room and shamefully got out of their seats to tend to their child and conversed on the way over. It was clear that they agreed the mother should go first, and off she went. The camaraderie I felt in that line that day was top tier because everyone was glaring at the father as he was waiting for his partner to finish the ride. By the time it was the father's turn, it was clear that he got secondhand embarrassment from the public shaming, because by the time he took his seat, his head was lowered. This was when my group's turn to take the ride as well, and it was awesome. The parents could not have gotten out of that ride any faster by the time we finished. May this be a PSA. If you're a parent and your child is too young to go on any of the rides, please, for the love of God, just hire a nanny for the day, or even better, leave your kids at home with a trusted babysitter. The workers at theme parks are not your freaking babysitters, and that is not within their job description. It's embarrassing that even has to be explained. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.